welcome to the 49th of Kilkenny Arts Festival. You're very welcome to be here. We are delighted to present Kevin Atherton and Sonia Shiel in conversation, and also Anna O'Sullivan from Butler Gallery is going to give a little introduction. Little pre-show announcement. In a highly unlikely event of emergency, the way out is the way you get in, basically, not to use the lift. And please take this opportunity to turn off your mobile phones, and there is no photography allowed during the show. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the afternoon. Yes, Sonia.
Thanks. I don't. You don't.
No.
Okay. You're very welcome here today at Parade Tower for Kilkenny Castle, our own old homestead. We used to be across the road in the basement of Kilkenny Castle, so it's quite nostalgic to be back here again. As you might know, we moved to our own home, Evans Home, in August 2020, so it's deja vu being back here. Anyway, we're thrilled to have Sonia and Kevin here today. Kevin Atherton's exhibition, The Return, has just opened at the Butler Gallery, where it will run till the 2nd of October, and the gallery is open every day except Monday. We're open late on a Thursday night, so there's no excuse to come visit and see the work, which we're going to discuss today. Delighted that we have the opportunity to hear Kevin talk about his reflecting on his 50-year career in the arts. Since the 1980s, Kevin Atherton has created many large-scale public sculptures and commissions. Well known as an art educator, he taught at the National College of Art and Design from 2000 to 2014, where he was head of Postgraduate Pathways in the Faculty of Fine Art, and as such has influenced a whole generation of young artists. As a previous resident of Inistioge, he's very happy to be back here returning to Kilkenny with this exhibition. When I asked Kevin to give me a wish list of whom he'd like to talk to, artist Sonia Shiel was top of the list, so we're really pleased that Sonia was able to make it here today for this In Conversation event. Sonia Shiel has upcoming exhibitions at the Kunstverein Ochram and Visual Carlo. She's supported by the Arts Council and is shown in a wide variety of contexts, both in Ireland and internationally, winning both the Hennessy Craig and the Tony O'Malley Awards. She's a graduate of NCAD and IADT, a fellow of Fordham University Art and Law Program in New York, a member of the Justice in Fiction Forum at UCD, and a resident of Temple Art Gallery and Studios. I'll just briefly read her artist statement. It's not something I wrote, it's Sonia's, but it is interesting. Usurping the normal conditions of an artwork with a kind of self-conscious agency, usually reserved for living things, Sonia Shiel's near-sentient works are often freestanding, traversable, presented with their own volition, backstory or environment, and sometimes consolidated within installations that use scripted audio work, performance, or video. Her alter egos are variations of the one persona, an artist longing to do something of import. Her works question their own agency within the world and seek to understand a society complicated by greed, poverty, gender, opportunity, and hope. Interesting statement, and a precursor to possibly some overlapping ideas in Sonia and Kevin's work.
Yeah.
I'll now pass you over to Sonia, who will lead this conversation with Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Sonia.
So when Kevin, I just want to say I'm absolutely honoured to have been top of the list. I don't think I've ever been top of anyone's list, so it's a joy. And Kevin has been such an inspiration always. Unfortunately, he never taught me, which is probably why I got top of the list. So I'm here to probably learn quite a lot today. And when we started talking about coming here and doing this exhibition, or doing this talk about the exhibition, Kevin mentioned that he had been here previously for a play.
I was here once before, I think 11 years ago, because I was in a group show at Rose House. Yes. And ever since I was a student, I think, certainly ever since I did In Two Minds, people have been saying to me, you must see Kraft's last tape. And of course, I'd read it, I was aware of it, but I saw a production of Crapslas tape in this tower, in this building 11 years ago. And it was as good as everybody said it was. Yeah.
But it was a surprise to you as well in terms of a lot of people associate some of your work as having the qualities of Beckett, but in fact he isn't your primary.
Not really. Coming from a generation of performance video makers from the early to the, in the mid-70s, then there was a kind of battle that might seem sort of silly now, but the battle was about establishing performance art as different from theatre. So if there was a end of theatre that was of interest, it was certainly the Beckett end. But when I came away that evening from the presentation, from the performance of Krapp's last tape here, the thing I came away with thinking about was that the actor who played Krapp, and everybody knows that it's an old man playing a tape recording, an old reel-to-reel recording of his younger voice. And I came away thinking, if you were someone like John Hurt, who was an actor who made Krapp's last tape his own, and John Hurt played Krapp when he was a relatively young actor, so he must have made the recording that's in the performance when he was young. And I pondered whether all through his career, and he played Krapp a number of times right up to his death, did he use the early recording? Mm-hmm. And that's the sort of segue, I think, in two minds, because the original 1978, the black and white tape, which is showing in the Butler, whether I don't like everything about it, there are aspects that I do like, but it is what it is, and it really is me at 27. It's not an actor who might have looked like me playing me. So these debates are less interesting now than they were in the 1970s, when things like video or film as art or expanded cinema were desperately establishing themselves as different from other art forms. But that was a kind of useful thing in my head. I loved Beckett, and I loved Krapp's last tape.
Well, it's a useful start for the title even of the exhibition, which is The Return. And so much of your methodology is about revisiting previous works. Yeah. And in a sense, I guess it's also encompassing that idea that we all face our former selves time to time, and maybe find them completely unrecognizable, or find some form of empathy that we mightn't have had at the beginning for our younger selves. Yeah. And so much of your work revisits your younger self. Yeah. And so the title for The Return is both symbolic and, I guess, literal as well. And it's about you returning to this place, Inistioge, as well. Which, by the way, I read is a protected national kind of treasure. And
that's Inistioge, yes, yeah.
But it might be, one day. So I guess so much of I read recently that one of Aidan Dunn's interviews with you to do my research on how to be a proper interviewer. I did some, thorough reading. Oh. And I came across a lovely story about your mother bringing you to Ireland to visit various tourist events, and one of them was the Sweepstakes.
My mother would get my brother and I. My parents ran a boarding house in the Isle of Man, and everybody worked in the boarding house. I was a waiter at the age of 12, having graduated from doing the washing up and stuff. And so each year at the back end, September, we would take a holiday in Dublin. Why Dublin, I don't know, but my parents had their honeymoon in Dublin in 1948. I think my brother was conceived in Dublin. And when I came to live in Dublin with my late wife, Vicky, we were driving around, and we'd be on the North Circular Road. It was here we stayed in a bed and breakfast. So my mother would say to my brother and I to come back from Mass with a copy of the Catholic Herald, because in the back were boarding houses in Dublin, and she would send off a letter and the deposit, and we went every back end. And ironically, it was when we were meant to be at school. She just took us out of school. We're having holidays, and nobody at school argued. And we would fly to Dublin for a week. And I think it was to show us how Catholicism was really done, not in the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man was a watered-down version. So people crossing themselves on the top decks of buses. We were looking for the church. But it was a military operation. And really, I suspect she was it was industrial espionage. Forget talking about the work, right? So we were here for a week. We would go to Guinness, of course, because of the free Guinness. Then we went to Players, and at the end of the tour of Players Cigarette Factory, we were given, we were boys. I was 11 when I first came to Dublin. 20 Players full strength, so 80 cigarettes for my father. Then we went to Jacob's Biscuit Factory, which I think is where DIT is, or was once. And at the end of that, you got a wonderful biscuit tin each with the biscuits in. And the biscuit tin served as a pencil case. And then the third one, and the fourth one was a bit of a risk, was the Irish Hospital Sweepstakes building in Ballsbridge. So the four of us, my mother and father, my brother and I, went to Ballsbridge, and it was a typing pool. I was expecting swimmers. I was expecting somehow this idea of typing in a pool. Are they in a pool then? And we went and we were given the most. This woman did her best to make a typing pool interesting. And these are all the people. This is where their subscriptions come in from all around the world. And the highlight was the drum at the end of the room. And her spiel was, and the drum is turned for 3 days and 3 nights. And then Miss Ireland, 1962, will pluck out the winning ticket. And we were like, it was boring as hell, but we were waiting. It's not going to be a packet of fags. It's not going to be biscuits. And at the end, this very nice woman in a kind of blazer leant forward to us and said, what's your star sign? And my brother and I had no idea what your star sign. And my mother said, what's your birthday? Tell her your birthday. And I said, 25th of November. We went through the four of us, and we all happened to have different birth signs. And she gave each of us a schooner, a glass, with the birth sign on the glass. So that was it. We were back the next year and the next year, rather than be Sagittarius, I was Pisces. So remember, just say, yeah, absolutely. You're Pisces, when the nice lady. So we did 3 years in succession, and my mother had the set in a bureau to the day she died. And so that's a return. That's a planned thing.
And it's also a kind of a foresight on your mother's part.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And that kind of foresight is very tempting to assume that you had foresight as a young man to make this work that would be relevant and would win the gamble against time, and that you would survive long enough to do the revisiting.
Yeah.
That's not.
That would not be the case, no, because as a young man, I wasn't thinking beyond the age. I wasn't thinking beyond the end of the week. I don't think I had any thoughts of getting older. I certainly never thought about being beyond 30. And having said that, and I think back to, particularly in Two Minds, the first question tape, the first time I performed that was at the Poetry Arts Centre in Dublin in 1978. And I recorded the questions in the morning, and then in the evening answered them with the audience divided, sort of Wimbledon style, going like this, between me and a monitor. And then I performed it in Belfast, and I used the same tape. I asked different questions in Belfast, because you could do that. There was nobody bought video art. There was no notion of it going forward in that way. But having said all of that, what is strange, which is me saying, no, there was no notion of projecting into the future, but at the same time, I kept it all.
Yeah.
From attic to attic, you know, from rented house, from squat to rented house, to the attic of the first house that we bought. And so, you know, I must have had my eye on it. There was a touch of my mother about it in that sense.
And you were gifted at the time with a particular emergence of technology that was to change everything in education and in the world.
Yeah,
That was
I
video.
think so. It was interesting that, I mean, the risk of making this a discussion about my mother, I remember the Sunday evening telephone call home, how are you doing, son? And I remember saying to her, I'm making a video. And this must have been 76 or something. And she said, no, she was a smart woman. And she said, what's a video, son? And it's weird to think that there was a time when there wasn't video, you know. And I remember saying, it's like film, Mum, but you can use it again, you know.
Interesting. So you were already thinking about it as a material and something accessible to you.
Well, I was thinking, at last I've found a medium that's got nothing about it that's attractive at all. This is a grainy old, disposable
It didn't have
thing.
established rules.
No, which was liberating. Nobody collected it, so there was no point in saving it. But I did save it. But it's the tape, the question tape. The question tape at the Butler was used in an installation at the Serpentine in 1978, and there were 2 monitors at either side of the space, and for 3 weeks, every day, 2 invigilators had to stand at either side of the room with big clunky switches, and there was a countdown, 1, 2, 3, now, and they did that, and the tape would kind of, and so it has these scratches on it. But who'd have thought that this medium that I thought had nothing appealing about it at all would, through time, to a younger generation, would, you know, young people go, wow, you know, look, it's scratchy.
Yeah.
And it's almost like...
It's a filter now.
Yeah, well, it's almost like sepia photographs were to my generation, looking at photographs of your grandparents. Why aren't photographs as nice as that now? So I suppose the lesson is everything eventually develops an aesthetic.
Yeah.
And certainly in terms of a younger audience, identify with the guy in the question tape, not the old guy. They're on the side of the young me.
So it's a good way to move into the end, which
The
is
end?
where we're going to start.
Right.
So the end is one of the short reel films.
Yeah.
I
don't
the
know,
gallery.
I'm not so sure how many people might have seen that piece, but it's easy to describe. I got a grant for, I'd left Leeds, but I was still living in Leeds. I got a £100 grant to make some films. £100 was a decent amount of money. I bought the cheapest 8mm camera I could buy for £10, no zooming, just image in this end, film out the other end. And I made a film in the centre of Leeds where basically I walk, it's no more than 30 seconds, and I'm holding up a sign, a blackboard with written on it, the end, and I just walk towards the camera until it fills the frame. And it's a bit wobbly. And it's, you know, it's about film, it's about real time. It's kind of about, I mean, now I'd be more willing to say there's more than a small dose of Buster Keaton in it. But what's remarkable is I shot it outside simply because I was no longer a student, so I had no access to a studio.
Yeah.
So I shot it outside of the house that I lived in. And it was back-to-back slumland of Leeds, and it was on a bomb site. And at the time, having made the transition from the Isle of Man to living in Leeds, I wasn't seeing that. So now it's about much more. It's like, blimey, look at the houses.
Yeah, because it's got a historical context now and a societal one.
Yes, and it gathered that, you might say, that was always there, but it wasn't visible to me then because it was the here and now. Same as looking out this window.
Yeah.
In 50 years, people might be going, look, there was a tourist industry once, or there were trees, who knows?
Yeah.
Or look at the quality of the image, it's not three-dimensional, So that's a good thing, it's a good point to make in that it isn't just me that's changed. The world has changed. The medium has changed. What's regarded as contemporary art has changed. And so these practices of performance and video and expanded cinema, film, they're no longer fighting battles. I mean, they're a part of the canon now.
Yeah.
So if you go into a contemporary art gallery, chances are you're going to see time-based work. But in the 70s, you weren't. You didn't. Certainly in most places.
Also, one of the smaller in the show reel. These are very short videos, and absolutely, how many are there?
There's about 15 or 16.
15. There's one particular one called Catch.
Yeah. There's a piece that I did when I was even younger. I was still a student. I put the camera. There were very large glass doors, and I put a camera the other side of the glass, and I had a tennis ball, and I just threw the tennis ball at the glass, and it's like as if the ball when it's projected is that big, but it's like I'm projecting it onto the wall, the surface on which you're watching it, and it's coming back to me. And I've revisited it. There's a 2-screen version, and I showed it in Palermo in Sicily, and the ball crosses the space. But I wanted to revisit it as an older man, so I had to find a jumper, and a very good friend of mine in the audience had the same salt and pepper pull a neck jumper, and I wore that. But I had the hardest job in the world. Tennis balls are bright green now. I couldn't get a grey tennis ball. Yeah. So I have this performance now where I'm bouncing the ball back with my younger self.
It's completely engaging.
And I catch and he catches. But it's like, I don't know, without being too pretentious about it, there's a line from Dylan Thomas where it goes something like, "The ball I threw whilst playing as a boy has not yet landed." Oh. And it's a nice notion of it. Yeah. So it's that, and still it's a simple, But this duality, this backwards and forwards, this tennis game between self and self is a consistent.
And if you listen very carefully to that piece, you can hear a little bit of conversation going on in the now with Anthony Hobbs, who you've collaborated to an extent on the making of the
wonderful,
editing
Anthony Hobbs, who is the Young Sung facilitator of 50% of contemporary Irish art, I think. And Anthony is the camera person, but is much more than just a technical.
He's your friend as well.
He's my friend, and there's a sort of empathy. There's joking going on, but there's an understanding. And in reshooting the pieces, the scene is often set by the formality. They're very formal. Looking at them now, that there's tends to be no zooming. That the camera is locked down, but Anthony gets it, and a lot of it is mirroring it, or I've used the phrase re-entering. It's not. When I'm, sometimes I'm sort of anxious about what are you doing? You're going back to your earlier work. You should be doing new work, but it's not. It's new old work. It's all old new work. I mean, it isn't just polishing it up because it's like going back, and it isn't the same. Nothing is the same. The Groundhog Day, you can never do it. Even if you did it, if we did this talk again tomorrow, you couldn't do it.
Yeah, no, I'm
Well,
not
we
doing
could do it, yeah.
But it's also a very intimate and honest way to make work. And I see that in certain other elements, technical elements, where, you know, you get your technology, which is usually a form of hiding behind technology and making things very clean. And we all do it on Instagram and make ourselves perfect. And you don't do that. So you have little hand coming through,
Yeah.
or, you know, all the errors are there, or the little laugh with Anthony,
Yeah.
or the fact that you say that you won that catch game by 3/4 of a minute.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
so, it's so sweet, and
Yeah.
it's really intimate. And there's a lovely cooperation and kind of sense of that.
Yeah.
With you and your former self, and you
And Anthony.
And
Yeah.
Anthony.
Yeah.
And also, there's a lot of humor in
Yeah.
these shorts. And when we were talking earlier, you said something lovely. You said, where there is human, there is humor. And I wonder if you have anything to say, because humor can be a difficult thing in art.
Yeah. Not jokes, not that I'm against jokes, but if you're... It's kind of a no-brainer, really. I mean, if you're... It's not primarily about laughs, it's about wit, I think. But if you're reflecting back on the medium, it's a funny thing to do. It's a playful thing to do. And if it stops it being didactic, you know, but it's not like I have to stop and go, okay, now's the time to put a dash of humor in it.
It's a very natural humor.
Yeah, but it comes out of the absurdity of the idea often. It's at its core. This is what? Let's do this. No, it's kind of like an impossible or preposterous thing to do. So it's inherently, and well, you know, as we were saying earlier, if there's a way of doing it and it's enjoyable, you know, it doesn't have to be arduous. No, it doesn't make the point better if it hurts the audience. No, in fact, I think the point is better made. It's not like going to mass or something. It doesn't have to be hell.
Yeah.
You know.
Mass?
Yeah. Well, they must have
Standing
changed
out the
that.
back.
That's
Standing out
changed
the
then.
back.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah, and I mean, there is a more conservative side to your practice. So when we look at the Iron Horses, for instance, there's still a wealth of humor when we look at the video you made of the Iron Horses, which is different to these the Iron Horses I'm referring to are situated between Wolverhampton and Birmingham.
Yes. Yeah.
And to see these Iron Horses, you would take that train journey and you would participate in the motion that it kind of creates. So your moving means that these horses that seem to be in motion become activated into their motion. And in the video, you get to play with that even more.
Yeah, it's a lot of the things. I mean, I'm wondering how many people got to see all of the show reel, but it's a good piece in relationship to the installation pieces, because it's kind of about framing and finding correspondences, I suppose. That the conceit behind Iron Horses is that it's not. You're right. There were 12 horses, 6 going that way, and there's a couple of miles between them, and they're site-specific. One's kind of going up a hill, one's in a paddock with real horses, and it's got its own fence. It's leaping the fence. But the conceit is it's Edward Muybridge. It's about movement, but the idea is, I like to think, it's Aesop's fable, the tortoise and the hare, except it's not the one that I was taught at school. The common story about the tortoise and the hare is that, or the one that I'm familiar with, is that the hare loses because of sloth, and the tortoise wins through sheer hard work and determination. There's another version that apparently Aesop wrote where there's more than one tortoise. The tortoise gets all his mates
so
this is perilously close to being tortoise-ish, and on the premise that all tortoises look the same. The tortoise gets his mates. He unionizes the tortoises. So they're on the race is to take place over this designated route, and the night before, the tortoises are positioned. The hare runs off. The tortoise is left behind. The hare goes half a mile, and there's the tortoise. But it's a different tortoise. So the conceit, the creative conceit behind Iron Horses is, it's not 12 horses, it's the same horse racing you on the train. And in the film, it uses the frame of the railway carriage within the frame of the film. And Anna was talking about this the other day, and so was the Ever Percept of Anthony Hobbs, that with the boxing film in the gallery, we were thinking, there's a socket. I wanted the boxing film to be on the floor. I mean, and even though they're giants, it's kind of like, it extends the space that we're in. But in the gallery, there's a couple of sockets there. But as Anthony pointed out, on the recording, which was made in Poznan in Poland, there's a socket over there, which is the recording of the socket in Poland. So there's this thing, I mean, René Magritte is a big influence. The notion of the painting within the painting, or the endless, I've got this wrong before, I say the endless recession, which we've been in now for 24 years. What I really mean is endless regression, where it go, the reflection within the reflection. But though, I mean, it's strange. I mean, we were talking earlier about, I don't want to undermine myself too much, but I really thought, I thought it was a radical practice. But actually, in looking back on it, it's very formal. It's very to do with picturing and framing, and I don't know. One might think about the 60s and expanded cinema as being like light shows and everybody off their head. I mean, there was that kind of, and little Keith Anger, little stabs at happiness, all this stuff that was going on in New York, performance art that was going on in the UK and in Ireland. There was a lot of it that was like that, and I was the guy in the middle of it who was going, make sure the camera's locked down. I mean, I must have been.
But there's so many things at play. There's so many dimensions that you rightfully had to take charge of it.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I like to think that the pieces were okay when I made them. They were primarily formal exercises that revealed a property of the medium. I used myself because I was cheap. I didn't have to, and I was always on hand. I didn't have to say, would you be in this film recording? Are you ready? Yes, yeah. So I used myself, but inadvertently, over time, it's become autobiographical. It wasn't autobiographical. If you take one of them, if you take the end film, which shows the bomb site in Leeds, it wasn't made with the intention that this is autobiographical. Over the years, I've accrued an autobiography in artworks. And it's for me, it's the preferred way around, rather it be the confessional.
Yeah.
It's more revealing than I ever thought it was, but I'm a different person now, so less concerned about, don't tell them that, less concerned about. I've looked at the boxing film, and maybe it was you, I've certainly said to other people, is there such a thing as a working class body?
Yeah.
And it does reveal. I just thought,
well, it's very in place, and you can see it again in the bicycle, your bicycle trip, where you are at once in Leeds again, and
Yeah.
the other
It's in
is
Palermo.
in Palermo.
Yeah.
And that was, well, I'll come back to
Yeah.
that actually, because I have something to say about that. But for the moment, I'm wondering about the signature piece and how, I guess when you're talking about going back to works and them being new works or copy works or things like that, you're met with that problem that artists face all the time. They think they've a great idea and they realize it's already been done, or everything's been done. And there's a real tango that you have to do to kind of say, okay, it's been done, but it hasn't been done my way.
Yeah.
So you're the master of this. Even in your own work, you're competing with your own original.
Yeah, but there were other people around. I mean, there were people like Dan Graham,
Yes.
American performance video in the UK, David Hall, contemporaries like David Chrisley, Steve Partridge. There were a group of, it didn't happen in isolation.
Yeah.
But, I don't know, the thing, can't speak for those other artists of my generation who are still alive in terms of how they regard their earlier work. But my work, because in some way the works are incomplete or open, or they use the fourth wall, they allow me to go back into them.
Yeah.
So if I would have made a piece of the boxing where it was two of us boxing, there would be no room for me now. And I'm able to re-enter it and do the same formal thing, which is saying, or I thought was only saying in 1972, this is a projected image, it's an illusion. If I box with it live, this is reality, I'm reality. But through over 50 years, where the body has changed, if you're coming away from that piece and you're thinking about the formal difference between projection and real time, you're missing it. That's there, but it's also about, blimey, what happened,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a teacher, you have to, I guess you're dealing with confidence tricks all the time. You're encouraging confidence in your students.
Confidence tricksters, students.
Yeah, when you're teaching them,
yeah.
you know, how to have courage
Yeah.
and all the rest. And of course, the kind of idea of autobiography and knowing yourself and knowing what's your materiality, what you have around you that you can use and all of that. And so you're always both self-mythologizing, but you're also taking a kind of a dissonance from yourself, a slight distance from yourself. And that's imperative to the artist, right? That they must think of themselves as the audience.
Yeah, you have to see yourself doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you feel, certainly with the Iron Horses, and then in another way with the signature piece and the boxing, that there's the audience has to fit in somewhere within that. Some of your works are necessarily, they need an audience, and some of them don't so much. They're more preoccupied with your own.
Yeah, I like to think that the works are accessible, but I think that they ask for a bit of work, or if you do a bit of work, you'll find it there. But it's the age-old dilemma between being explicit but wanting to be implicit. And if you have to say, make sure you don't miss that, you've already killed it. It's the finding of it that makes it. So I have tattoos on both forearms, and my first passport, which was a Manx passport, back in 1972, when I needed a passport to go to Germany for life to be a successful artist. I was back in the Isle of Man within 2 weeks. But in the passport, they used to say
Tattoos.
Any identifying features, and I just wrote tattoos both forearms, which is the title of the photographic piece.
Yes.
And it said occupation, artist, tattoos both forearms. And unlike tattoos now, and I'm not criticizing tattoos now, but very few people had tattoos then.
Yeah.
Certainly no, I was the only art student at Leeds with tattoos. And the first one is rather predictably the Manx flag, the three legs of man, which I had done when I was 19. And I really gave it it wasn't like a drunken night. It was like, this is who I am. This is where I come from. And then a year later, I went into a tattooist who it turned out was a rather famous tattooist. Perhaps you've heard of him, Stan Wormhold. No? Stan Wormhold was a very famous tattooist in the West Riding of Yorkshire. And I went into this, it was a Sunday afternoon, and as I said before, not many people had tattoos, so it was full of bikers. Bikers, jailbirds, and sailors. Not many sailors in Leeds, so it was mainly bikers. And they were looking at the wall and were going, I'll have a 36 this week. And I went in, and I'd already taken a pen, and I'd signed my arm with a biro. And I just went in, and I said to Stan, follow that line. And he did it, and he did it really well. He got the dot above the I and the two dots at the end, spot on. But he said, who's Kevin Atherton? And I said, I am. And he thought I was he thought that Kevin Atherton was a pop star. So I don't regret them. I would never have another one. I would never have another one done. But the piece there's two signature pieces, if you like. There's the two photographs, and with the one, there's a photograph again taken by the wonderful Anthony Hobbs. There's a photograph of my signature, and that print is signed in blue ink, like the tattoo. It's a diptych. The other photograph is of the three legs of man. That's embossed in the bottom right-hand corner with a shamrock, because I now have an Irish passport, and I had lived in Ireland for 20 years. And there's the thing about, it's in the skin, it's in the paper. And if you put a big arrow that pointed at that, make sure you see the water, make sure you see the emboss, you kill it. So, I'm kind of surprised, and I think it's down to Anna and the way that the show was hung, that the works inform one another. If you get that, you know to look forward in another one. And then the 3D print of the two figures of me signing myself, makes sense if you know, oh, he really has got a tattoo. Yeah, you don't have to know, but it, I always like that in books. I remember, like every art student who went to art school in the late 60s, I read a lot of Gunter Grass, The Tin Drum, and I remember reading The Tin Drum, thinking it was a fantastic book, and the main character in that is Oscar, who beats this drum. There's a movie, and it was a big cult. He blew it at the end because his whole position within in post-war German literature, everybody knows this, was to say, look, in order to go forward, Germany has got to come to terms with its past. But he kept it secret that he was in the Nazi youth, which he was telling everybody else in this cathartic way, no more secrets. But nevertheless, he was a great writer. And I remember reading The Tin Drum, and then reading Cat and Mouse, which is in another part of Germany, in fact in Poland, I think. Anyway, reading it, and this character beating a drum walks through the book. He has a walk-on part, and it was like, oh God, I dropped the book. And I think it's called intertextuality, but that idea that books might appear in other books, or artworks might appear in other artworks, it's kind of Borges, it's labyrinthine in that way.
That's perfect, because it reminds me of something else that I suppose, as with all of our lives, and as you go along, there are many ghosts that prop up.
Yeah.
And you have, very specifically, you have Joy, who is on a platform, and a fantastically long story between you and one of your models that...
Which I'll give you the short version. Shall I
give you the short version? Because we have only some time.
In 1986, I got a commission for Brixton Railway Station. I could bore the pants off you by talking about, it's an island platform. So that means there's a kind of pier down the centre. And I body cast 3 people to stand on the platforms, and I positioned them in a straight line in order to emphasise their stillness, their waiting, and the trains went in between. So there were 2 people looking at one another, and the third person is looking beyond the platform. And because it was in Brixton, I selected the models. 2 of the people are black British people, and one is a German woman, a white German woman. And the work has been there since 1986. Keeping it short. And post-Colston, when the statue of Colston, the slave master in Bristol, was thrown in the quay at Bristol as a protest, which I was very much behind. I saw a thing online that said one of the figures at Brixton Station was missing, and it happened to be the white woman, Karen. She'd been removed, and the story was that British Rail had removed the white woman as a preemptive act to stop there being a backlash that her figure would be vandalised. I was totally, what? And then I contacted the railway line. Nothing to do with that. She was rocking on her feet, so they'd removed her for safety reasons. I'd got in touch with them and said, thank God you've got in touch with us. I said, they all need polishing up. And the line that Joy looked out on, and she is a very strong woman, and she's standing like, as a young woman, as a 26-year-old mother of one, she's standing like this, and she has a bag, a type of bag, a real 1986 bag at her feet. And she's like a young, confident 26. She's kind of putting it up to you.
You can see her in the gallery, actually, in small version.
Yeah, the maquette is there. And she was hidden behind a fence because one of the railway lines is no longer used. So I said, we have to find Joy and put her on the other platform, and she needs somebody to look at. Let's try and find Joy and recast Joy. So there's 36 years between the 2 of them. I found Joy. It was very emotional. People said, I think she was very ill, Kevin. She might be dead. And I found her, and it was real sort of emotional stuff. And I've recast her with modern technology, with 3D scanning and 3D printing. And with a bit of luck, next month, now all of the figures will go back on the platform, and Joy will be looking at her younger self with the same bag at her feet across the platform with the trains going on. And in a way, it's a bit like In Two Minds.
Well, that was what I was going to bring you to now, and we only have a few more minutes left, so I'm going to ask one more big question, and then I guess all of you guys might have some questions. So, In Two Minds is probably your hit, right? Your number one.
And I'm grateful for it.
And it's been all over the world, it seems, certainly been in some significant galleries. But you describe yourself in it alarmingly as a boring old fart.
Do I?
Yes, you do.
Yes, that was directed to the boring young fart.
Well, there you go. Yeah. So I find that, of course, an introduction to the kind of humility that you have gained.
Yes.
And the tenderness that you speak to your younger self with, the patience, and all the qualities that I've heard that you had as a teacher as well. And
don't believe it.
Well, we see that in Two Minds, and we see some real tenderness as well in The Return, which is the seminal work of the exhibition, I guess, and is a beautiful tribute to Vicky, your late wife.
Yeah. Again, incredibly formal. And as I said in that statement, and I don't usually like statements that explain things, but I wanted people to know what was behind that piece. And I know that if Vicky would have still been alive and I was doing this, I might have had to bribe her, but she would have stood behind the board and we would have turned again.
Yeah.
But I now do it with a photograph of her, which is a screen grab from the original 1972 film. But again, this thing about doing a work, getting a work from an older work, something else happened. And the real, if things had gone to plan, I would have got I think I would have still got a good work or a good enough work from it. But something happened in the making of it that I hadn't planned. I wasn't aiming for it as an optical effect. I didn't say to Anthony, what I want to get is, but what happened is that with the still image of Vicky, my late wife, she was lit from one side, and when I turn holding her photograph, I love these chairs, by the way. When I turn like this, and she's turning into the light in the studio space where she's being recorded, and because she fills the frame and she's against black, it's like a hologram. It really is, she becomes three-dimensional. And in the real footage, is a beautiful, she does a lovely smile in the film. And it's like, I was doing it, and of course, I'm in it, and I hear Anthony almost faints. Anthony goes, oh God. And I kind of knew what he was talking about. But it's that thing, I think, I mean, this is a good way to wrap up maybe. I think if I would have gone for that, I wouldn't have got it.
No.
And in a similar way, I think in making In Two Minds, as a 27-year-old, if I was thinking, this will supplement your pension when you're 71, it wouldn't have been the same. It would have been too contrived.
It's the serendipity that you're able to recognize.
Yeah. Or it happened. Or if you're not too, if you're open, stuff happens.
Gifts.
And it's the best, a gift.
Yeah.
And it's better than what you thought you would.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's like going to the shops and you come back with something better than what you went for.
A surprise.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe somebody else has some questions. Does anyone have questions? Kevin, have you any questions?
Yeah, call that an interview? What was that?
I can go. I can keep going. Well, when I was... Oh, good. Eamon.
Right.
Thank you. Kevin, good to see you again.
Sorry?
Good to see you again.
And you, yeah.
My question's about, you've alluded to it sort of twice. One's about collecting of video work.
Yeah.
And the fact it was never really bought, but it was being made in the 70s.
Yeah.
But also that thing about technology and how technology has changed. And I wonder what your viewpoint is on the essence of work. And I'm going to use the analogy of someone like Bruce Nauman, whose work was made and as a performance, and then recorded onto film, and then the Tate would have had it in their collection, would have went from film to video, video to DVD, and DVD to digital. Yeah. And is the work still there, is my question, from the performance through to what we see now online as a film?
Bruce Nauman is a very good person to cite, but Nauman was an influence on me when I was a student, and well, you know, always is a presence. But I think that the transferring that I've done has extended the work rather than made another version of it. I think it becomes sufficiently different. It's not just a convenient distribution system that it then enters. I think it becomes something else. I mean, having said that, people used to have fights in pubs after performances and openings about the difference between real time and theatrical time. People used to go to battle. English artist Malcolm LeGrice, who was very much a filmmaker, David Hall was a video maker. Those two people couldn't be in the same room because of these battles about the purity of film over video or vice versa. Now we're in a different world where those terms, if you say video art, it has no meaning. you know, at the moment it's called moving image practice, I believe. And it's about different things. It's not fighting battles. If I was fighting the same battles I was fighting in the 1970s, I'd be a bore. It's boring. They're battles that have been won.
Yeah.
And I think rather than, as a kind of general response, that I think you're critically pointing out something that could be a negative. I think in my work and in the way that I've addressed it, rather than hide the slippages, hide the graininess and the layering, those very shifts that you pinpoint are highlighted in the work. Mm-hmm. They're not disguised. It's like, it was that, it was 1972, then it was this, now it's video. They're there. They're not polished out, if you want.
No, and there's a lovely moment actually in Two Minds where you tell your younger self that in fact you're the old guy. You're like dated, and
yes.
I'm alive. I'm the new guy. I'm the new thing.
Yeah, I'm in colour.
I'm in colour.
Yeah.
You are in colour.
Yeah, I'm in colour. Yeah.
Any questions? Oh yes, over here. Oh, you get to you next.
Yeah.
Hi. I have first a comment and then a question. I am one of Kevin's many students, prior students. I don't know if there's anybody else here, but I will say you mentioned several things in some of your questioning that I'd like to say I saw in Kevin as an educator as well as an artist. One was that openness, but also the courage, and also the reflection. So you have this wonderful way, Kevin, of being open to possibilities, but also then reflecting and thinking about and thinking very intensely about the situation or the possibilities. And I remember you as my tutor, like often you'd be just so like intensely trying to think this through. You would physically manifest it. So anyway, I missed that.
Thank you.
But I was curious, just following on the last question and your reaction to that. So what are some of the things, what are some of the battles that you're currently looking at in your work?
Battles within the work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, or work that you're working on?
It's all plain sailing. There are no battles. There's always battles. There's always sort of anxieties too about, you know, I think this repetition thing, I think I'm onto something, but repeating yourself is what you do when you get old anyway. So I have a lot of anxiety about that. I'll be doing this in the rest home, you know. Is this? So you need to. One needs to keep an eye on that. But there's a kind of thing I think that's liberating about getting older. Is that okay? I'm not going to do that anymore. This is, and it's maybe a narrowing down, but it's a kind of acceptance. This is what I do, and this is what I can do with what I do, and. You know, one can have great admiration for other people who do different things in visual art, or great admiration for people in other fields. But like, I'm reading Paul Auster's massive 4321. It's by the side of the bed, and it's just so. I mean, if I was to write, he's done it. It's so wonderful. So I'm not going to do that. And there's an acceptance. Certainly as a 71-year-old, which is different from the 21-year-old, that I'm not going to do all that now. I'm doing this, and that's and without being depressing about it, the clock is ticking. You're kind of timing your run, and I think the sort of Wildean portrait in the attic thing, they'd been there long enough. It was time to get them out, and I didn't have the time to do it when I was teaching. And I think I was saying to you yesterday, Teresa, that the degree to which I don't miss teaching is shameful. It's terrible that I did this all my working life, more or less. And the day I left, right, that's over. And I'm doing something else. But I was never. I don't think education is the thing to be ashamed of. I think art is is a form of education, and the two overlap. They, you know.
Over here, I think there's a question just to the front here. Second on the left.
Thanks so much. I really loved your conversation, and so Kevin and Sonia, thanks a million. But and I haven't formulated this question properly, and it kind of, because I was listening to your brilliant answer, so it wasn't. But I hope I can somehow formulate it properly here. So my first part of the question is that I'm really conscious, and particularly became conscious of it because I studied my master's in London, which is not a boast at all, but it just was a case that really made me conscious of what it was. I never thought about being working class until I went there. And it's almost, sorry, I'm really nervous.
Yeah.
So it's almost 10 years ago now, but things have just gotten worse. And there was hardly anyone there who was working class in London studying at that time. And now it's much worse.
Yeah.
And it's here too. I'm not saying Ireland is any better. It's not at all pointing the finger. And so I wanted to know how we can, make sure that actually this stops happening. It's something I really feel, troubled about and passionate about.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I know you asked amazing Sonia, so this is not a dig at all, but I would love to hear about some of your female influences. Like when I think of performance art, I think of like seminal female artists. I don't know, I guess it's because I am a female, but I think of like Yoko and Joan Jonas and Anna Mendieta. And so I'd love to hear about some of your female artists. And I did have a third part, but it's gone. But thanks so much.
That's a good question.
Yeah. Laurie Anderson was a big influence, and I showed work at, and never had a conversation with her, but showed work at same festivals, conferences as Laurie Anderson. Thought it was great that she had a hit record, but was in group shows. I had a group studio, 2B Butler's Wharf, which was a mixture of male and female contemporaries. I can't lie about it. The class thing is an interesting question, but I sometimes wish, there's a part of me that wishes it was much easier to address. There are plenty of good artists who are middle class, and that's a real bugger, because then that derails your argument straight away. It's much more complex. I mean, there were times when I wish it was much simpler, where I could lay my perceived slights at that particular door. I don't know, but I think Howard Jacobson, who was a very witty, very funny, and very Jewish English writer, very Jewish humour in what he does. But for a while, he was doing a series of Saturday articles for the English Independent newspaper, where he visited artists in their studios. And I don't get the Independent, but I picked one up in the dentist or something, and he was interviewing an artist, and it must have been the third or fourth person in the series. And he says, and I was talking to Peter, and he was arguing that he felt that his work was overlooked time and time again, to such an extent, and this has happened on the previous interviews. This is Jacobson speaking, to the extent where I now think that a defining characteristic of what an artist is somebody who's dissatisfied with the amount of attention they've received. So it's there. I'd like to think it's changing, but I never. It's funny. It's like until you leave home, you don't know you've got an accent. So it doesn't. I never left home. I mean, I went to Leeds College of Art. Leeds is an industrial city, so I wasn't in a group of students that were all toffs, but there was a mixture, and it wasn't something we talked about. I didn't. Thank God, I wasn't carrying the weight of doing this for the working classes, because in a way, I wasn't that aware that I was working class. Other people made me aware. It's a long, you have to be in for the long haul. I mean, short story to end it. For a long time I taught at Chelsea College of Art, but when I initially started to teach there, I was a visitor. And the head of the sculpture department was taking a break, but she fixed for me to come in and do a day of tutorials. And at that time, in my sort of mid-30s to my mid-40s, I dressed, as a kind of tribute to Rennie Magritte, I dressed very normally. I always had a shirt and a tie. I didn't want to look like a tutor in an art school. So I suppose I looked like an office worker. I like to think middle management, but with a future. And I was invited in to do a day's teaching in the sculpture department, where in essence nobody knew me. And the first mistake I made was I got in there early. I was in there at 9:30, and there was no staff. The canteen was open. I went to the canteen, I got a coffee, still nobody there. And I walked around the studio, and there was a guy in the customary cubicle, and I was walking, and I was sort of walking around, and I walked past this person. I came over here. I said, see if you can go. And eventually I built up the courage to go in to his studio, and I sat down, and he was really giving off a vibe. He didn't want me there, and I said, not totally contrived, but the first question was a kind of clumsy. I said, it was a real dad question. I said, do you make a lot of these? And he treated me like an idiot, you know. And I clocked, this guy thinks I'm in to do the audit in the office, and I'm having a look round an art school. And he was really like, it was terrible. He was like pushing me out. And I said, oh, and you do them in different colours. This is terrible. This crippled this guy, and we kept going. And I got a little bit, I was getting into my stride. Oh, that's a multiple. And he was so middle class, and he was so terrible. And then I pointed at something, and he said something, and I said, you mean in a post-Duchampian way? And the guy just died. It was like pulling out the gun and going, poof.
You're like the secret tutor.
Yeah.
Those guys who get the secret boss who goes into the factory to
and,
see what people are really like.
Yeah, an assassin. But if you wait long enough, revenge is a dish best served cold.
Yeah.
Yeah,
more blue.
Yeah. We don't. Yeah, more blue. Yeah. Yep.
Who's going to win the derby?
Next year's derby, don't know. It's in a field in Ireland, that's for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin.
No, and thank you.
It was an absolute
Thank you.
pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks, Sonia. Good. We got away with it. Thank you.